So welcome, Kiri. We so appreciate your consistent leadership as always. And at SETC, we begin all things by acknowledging and giving thanks to our Creator. We give thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Kiri, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Thanks, Victor, and it's great to be here, and thank you for that kind acknowledgement and land acknowledgement as well. So yeah, it's good to be here with you. My name is Kiri Bird. I use she/her pronouns, and I'm a settler of European ancestry, currently living and raising my family in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Peoples Territory. That is the Coast Salish peoples in what is known as Vancouver, BC. I'm sitting here looking at a very snowy morning, which is very unusual for this part of the world. Thanks for inviting me here to talk about my work. What I currently do is lead the carbon offset investment strategy at Telus, which is a major Canadian telco. People will be familiar with. We really have been pursuing a broader corporate strategy around diversification and tech for good. So we have Telus Health and Telus Agriculture and Solutions, and I'm currently involved in building a nature restoration and climate solutions business located in the sustainability team. And the lens I bring to that work is looking for, ways to bring together, weave together, and build with our reconciliation team so that we can advance simultaneously our climate and reconciliation commitments at the organization. I've been with Telus about 6 months now. Prior to that, so it's relatively, new. You're going to get that kind of fresh perspective, which will be, I'm sure, interesting for the conversation today and for your viewers. But prior to that, I have worked for about 15 years in the broader social impact sector, in philanthropy at Vancouver Foundation. I supported the inaugural investment readiness program funding call. I worked for the last number of years with the First Nations Technology Council, working towards digital equity for Indigenous peoples and technology training and skills development, and also worked with lots of inspiring social innovators at RADIUS SFU. So yeah, lots of different sectoral experience, and looking forward to talking to you about how we bring those perspectives, forward into the complex work we're all undertaking.
Indeed. Your work has always been inspiring. And it's a perfect segue to my next question. What inspires you right now in your current role? What has you curious? What's lighting your fire?
Yeah, I am really inspired by learning about the opportunities for Indigenous-led, nature-based solutions, right? So, we just have such an incredible opportunity with the legal foundation here in Canada. We're seeing tangible examples of land back, of meaningful reconciliation, of partnerships, and there are so many leaders in this space to learn from. So yeah, I'm just really fired up about seeing a lot of the movement. I think a lot of the climate leadership that is poised to come from Indigenous nations, and I'm inspired to be part of that. In terms of Telus's participation, we are looking to work towards, as I said, our climate commitments while advancing reconciliation. So having worked at the First Nations Technology Council and supported the Moving Beyond Inclusion program, where we worked with corporate companies to sort of transform their structures in service of economic reconciliation. It's really cool and inspiring to see how many tech companies and other companies are really taking Call to Action 92 to heart, really figuring out what does this look like in an actionable way for our company. How can we be accountable? How can we be public about our commitments? And how do we move the dial on reconciliation? So, I'm really hopeful and think there's a lot of opportunity to do that, not just within Telus, but in many corporations in Canada.
Indeed. I can't thank you enough for how much you do for so many and the different intersectional roles you've played, not just in philanthropy in the private sector, but just in the social impact sector in general. So I think you'd be the perfect person to ask this question. What challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you've taken to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
When I was thinking about, that question, maybe not so much a challenge that I'm facing in my work right now, but a kind of concern I have. And when I think about the next few years and the important timeline we have for meeting the climate, meeting the climate crisis we are in an equitable way, I'm thinking about, how most carbon dioxide removal capacity we need to build needs to happen in the next 2 years. Microsoft published that'll happen in the next 2 years, and all of it by the end of 2027, in order for companies, for example, to meet their 2030 pledges. And in this environment today, where we do have high interest rates, it isn't easy to be bold necessarily with your money, and it really does require bold leadership, and we really do need venture capital. We need impact capital for scaling climate tech and nature tech, and for financing, the projects that are going to help us meet our climate, not just commitments, but the required emissions reductions and removals to mitigate climate change worsening on a catastrophic scale per se. So anyway, I would say it's kind of this tension of the short term, the short term need and opportunity ahead of us. And so what is required? What are the strategies, you ask? Like, I think we need to be heart-centered in this work. We need to be making the case. We need to be making the business case, but we also need to be stepping up and leading with our values. So yeah, I would say try to make the case for that.
I couldn't agree more. I just finished a conversation with my favorite colleague, Julie Segal, around the Climate Aligned Finance Act and just FinReg in the space. And there's so much work to be done, especially after COP. A lot of climate activists and folks in the ecosystem are disappointed with the concept of phase down as opposed to phase out. And so there's a lot happening, but the fact remains that there are a lot of folks stepping up. And once again, I applaud your leadership in this space, as always. So my next question is, do you have a set of key priorities in your work right now?
Yeah, our work right now, we're really focused on our net operational carbon neutrality goal. So I am, actively working with a really exciting project developer partner to assess opportunities. And we're speaking right now with nations, Indigenous businesses, and governments, and trying to weave in as much involvement and participation as we can to our first carbon project. So that's a key priority, and looking forward to being able to announce more about that in the coming months.
Incredible. So how do you feel about the future of the private sector in this ecosystem? Being able to, there's a huge ESG pushback in the States that we've seen. I don't know if it's creeping too much in terms of the work in Canada, but how do you feel about the future? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you hopeful?
No, I'm certainly optimistic. I think we're seeing a lot of maturation in the market. I think we're seeing more broad-based awareness that change is required. I think there's a bit of nitty-gritty on how quickly, we're all gonna get aligned and on the same page and move forward together. But I would say one of the things that I'm feeling optimistic about is, and this is more broadly speaking, about the social impact sector at large, is that I think we're looking at the linked social and ecological, or the linkages, right, between the social and ecological impacts and opportunities in a more holistic way than I've ever seen in my career previously. So there's a lot of convergence. We're looking at, how in terms of what I'm looking at, climate action and Indigenous rights, and how do those things go hand in hand. But, I hear, how is environmental health, human health? I hear, how do we, reach more energy efficiency while also addressing affordability? Like, I think that conversation is happening more and more in many places. So that makes me optimistic that, the poly crisis is requiring us to act and think in this way. And I think people are starting to get that message and weave together.
I couldn't agree more. So in the midst of this global poly crisis, What is your ultimate goal, and what does success feel like and look like to you and your colleagues?
I like how you asked, how does it feel like and look like? Because sometimes I feel like one thing it would look like is not, flying over Canada and seeing degraded landscapes, for example. We could measure it in old forests, right, that are standing and growing, and so it's about enhanced ecological integrity. It's about the restoration of biodiversity. It's species coming back from extinction, right? Like, I think those are the big things that a lot of us care about. But I also think it's about sustainable livelihoods for, land embedded communities. And I think for individuals and households and businesses, it'll be, hopefully, if we can, as I say, get aligned and take action, it'll be increased resilience and less disruption from these climate events.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. I couldn't agree more. Well said. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or a call to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, I asked you about your listeners right before we hopped on, and I think it's a lot of folks that, based on what you said, or as you say in the credit union movement, but also the social impact sector and philanthropy. And I just wanted to say that I'm having a lot of fun having changed sectors a few times in the last years here. And I heard a great quote recently. I read a great quote by an acquaintance, Ryan St. Germain. I don't know if you know him. He's a Métis entrepreneur and convenes Indigenous Tech Circle. He said, don't build your career ladder, build your career lattice. And kind of thinking about those horizontal opportunities, because there's so much we can learn. It's been such a humbling experience, moving into a much different type of culture and organization. So yeah, I would just say, it's in order, again, to do this multi-sector work to address the complexity of issues we're trying to deal with today. It's been an incredibly valuable experience for me, and one I would recommend to others.
Well, my wife, as a horticulturalist and agroecologist, would love that quote. Don't build your career ladder, build your career lattice. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for all that you do, your transparency, all the introspection, words of wisdom, and actual insights you shared. I really appreciate you, Kiri, for all that you do for so many. And as always at SETC, we close the way we began, by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging, giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Kiri. We so appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Victor.